One. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back as usual for the last, of this year. And I would probably guess that if I say that most of us will be happy that this year is over or soon to be over, I think we all would probably agree. So cheer for all of us that this year is going to be over soon. There are lots of reasons why to despair. That's not what we want to focus on the next hour. We want to spend some time thinking positively about the kinds of things that are coming up on next year. And so what I thought we would do today, I told Linda we'll do one review again on COVID, and we've done these kind of sporadically or every other session that I've been here in the last 9 or 10 months. We've been doing something about COVID. So we'll do one more of those this year. This will be the last one. And what I thought I would do is I instead of me putting together a presentation like I usually do, is to have a guest. And so we'll have a guest, and I'm going to introduce him in a minute. But before I introduce the guest and have him kind of lead the conversation and discussion today. And I think he does have some comments and remarks that he's going to make and presentation-like, but we really would like to generate a conversation with you guys. And so I told him you guys were a chatty group and that you cook up some challenging questions, so don't let me down. Hopefully we can get a conversation rolling. Because I told him he didn't have to put together an hour presentation, that would be the wrong approach today. So he'll have some remarks, and like I said, in comments and some slides, but ultimately we want you to ask questions and just comments and discussion. I think it would be really helpful. I like to hear what's in your mind about things. So to set up the conversation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to review 2 slides that I have where I'm going to show the usual graphs that I've shown you before with a trajectory of things nationwide and in Sacramento, just to kind of keep the perspective of where we're going to end the year. And then I'm going to have a second slide, which is essentially kind of the hopeful part of this, which will introduce the topic of the vaccines. And then I think Ryan will take it from there and kind of go over some conversations about vaccines. If I can predict correctly what he's going to ultimately do, he's going to probably talk some general concepts about vaccines, and then we can get a little bit maybe on the COVID vaccine conversation. And at the end of the hour, if we want to talk more about this, this is a conversation that could take hours and hours, and there could be lots to cover. So if we at the end of the hour want to converse more about things, we can then invite him again for early next year to come back and talk some more or expand more on something that we want to talk more with him about. So this is not all, final, it's the only chance we have to talk about this. It's just a way, today we'd like to start introducing the conversation of vaccines. Vaccines are here, they've been with us for a long time, they're going to be with us for a long time into the future, and so learning some about vaccines is always helpful. This is one of the probably largest successes of modern medicine around the world, is the ability of having vaccines.
Dr. Lopez, it would be a lot easier to hear you and understand you and the other speakers if everybody is muted except for you and your guest speaker, please.
That's great. Yeah, please, people, if we can get everyone muted to avoid some of the background noise. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. So you should be seeing can you see my slide?
Yeah, you've got 5 slides.
Got it. I'm trying to have it play. Okay, now it should play. So this is a graph that I've shown before. My source is the New York Times. Nothing very fancy here, just the old-fashioned New York Times, and they've been collecting the data, and they just put together the simple graph. And so I've used it. You've seen it many times before. This is the number of cases as an average per 7 days. in the United States. And so this is where we were in countrywide back in March. This is the first appearance of cases of COVID. This is what then we call the surge after the appearance, and it was starting to level off. And then we had the first surge, which happened somewhere in the July, August period of time. And then we started leveling off again, down again, but then we have this first surge, and this is what people call the surge on the surge right here on top of that of cases across the country. So that's what, so we were already in the upstroke, and then we have we had a little dip and other upstroke, and that's the surge on the surge. So when you hear that on the news, that's what that means. I'm going to tell you that my prediction is that we are going to have a second surge on a surge. So there's going to be, when we look at this in January, February again, there's going to be another hump here before we actually start coming down. That's my prediction, and that's because we Americans are still determined to get together in Christmas, and we're determined to still get together in New Year's. So we are going to see the effect of that determination that we have to do that into January, probably late January, before things start leveling off, because then we don't have any other reason for the next few months to get together. So this is really a representation, I think, of the behavior of us in the country as we gather in different occasions, and you can kind of time this by holidays and national activities, and we could have a whole discussion about what those events are if you like. So let me show you. So this is countrywide. This is what Sacramento's done. So Sacramento has mirrored that, but at remarkably lower amounts, because this is the scale here is up to 200,000 cases in the United States. We're down to the scale here is 2,000 cases, so it's a much smaller place, obviously. But we had our very, very, very small initial presentation of COVID in April. Then we had our surge, which was kind of goofy in the sense that it went up and down and just kind of linger a little bit more. But we started leveling down, actually. And then we had our big surge, and this is where we are according with the country. So this is the numbers in Sacramento. Now what I'm going to show you is the death rates, the mortality with it. And so so this is that for the entire United States. Down here is for Sacramento, and the pattern is there was a remarkable amount of death, if you will, in relationship. If you look across this graph, most of the death rate has happened initially because we were struggling to figure out how to take care of this illness. And then we started figuring it out, realizing the better way of taking care of people and whatnot. And that was really remarkable reason why we had a drop in mortality. It was not because of medications. It's not until the summer that we start learning some of the medicines that are probably helpful for people based on some studies and reports. And so down here, we stay kind of low because of them better understanding of how to take care of people, support them in the hospital, and then some of the medications that have come about. And none of them are curative. All of them are just supportive at best. Some of them may shorten the time of the illness. There's not a cure for this disease. There's no medicine we give to cure anyone with COVID at this point. And so now we've seen another surge on the mortality rates that is attributed now because of the high rates of patients. But if you look, this is, it's the height of these two curves are fairly close to each other, but realize that there's a lot more cases. So that means the mortality as a rate, as a fraction of the number of cases is much lower now. And that's a good thing. That demonstrates that the odds of any one person getting COVID dying today is much lower than the odds of doing that 6 months ago or 8 months ago. But because we have so many more cases now than we did before, then they still fairly high rates as a population, as a country. We have the same pattern here in Sacramento. Our rates went up and then came down, up and down, and then they're up again as a function of the fact that we have a lot more rates. And so we're hoping that, we're hoping for a treatment that shows up that eliminates these rates independent of the number of cases. that will be a good thing if it were to show up, and there are lots of clinical trials for that. But what is showing up, and it just showed up within the last week, is a vaccine. And then we're hoping the vaccine is going to reduce the number of the cases. The vaccine works at preventing cases, but if you then go on to have a case, a severe case of it, you would expect that you still would have some mortality. But if we can reduce the number of cases, then this number of deaths that follows the number of cases should drop off. So the vaccine is primary prevention of actually capturing the virus to start with. Now, in the world of vaccines, and this is just to say that there are lots of them. There are lots of vaccines. This is, again, one of these historical modern medicine tales that will be told for a long time about how a new disease, a new virus that shows up in society at the end of 2019, by the end of 2020, there are over 100, and these numbers here are numbers of vaccine candidates in the circle, in this pie chart, and there are over 100 candidates of vaccines out there. And I'm not going to go into details of what these kinds are, and we can converse that more with Brian. But just to say that there are just lots of them. And these green ones are the ones that are in clinical development, meaning they're already been given to people. And these are preclinical development. These are still at the level of the laboratory or in animal testing at this point. And this is a paper from November of this year. So it's about a month old now. So there are a few that have arrived, a few vaccines that have arrived, and there's a lot more in the pipeline coming through, and that's really a representation of the ability that we have as a international society. This is not just in the United States; this is all over the world. To develop the knowledge that we have and the research that we've invested over many, many decades of work, such that we can actually meet this challenge and within a year of a new virus, have some candidates that are being injected on people already. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce my friend, Dr. Ryan Waltz. Ryan, which I'm sorry, I never got used to calling you Dr. Waltz, which is the title you deserve, Ryan, but you're my friend and colleague. And so Ryan was a student with us in the laboratory when he was in his bachelor's degree. And then he went ahead and went to Roger University in New Brunswick. And he did his PhD in chemistry and chemical biology, where he also studied computational biology and biophysics, which has always blown my mind because it's just really the tough stuff I ran away from and went to medical school for, to stay away from this very difficult subjects. And he has an incredible passion for the work he does in this area. And in his training and in his work, he's actually worked on studying vaccines and viruses. And so I'm going to let him tell us about what he does and let him lead the conversation today. But so welcome, Ryan, and I appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thank you.
With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see you and then have you share your content as you like.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, you know, so it's funny that you mentioned that you ran away from biophysics and all that, because I actually ran away from medical school for, the opposite reasons, because I thought that was too hard. So, we all have our specialties.
Sure.
But, so I might need Dr. Lopez to comment on any technical things, because a lot of my research is highly focused on especially influenza or the flu virus, and that's where everything stems from. So feel free to chime in if I say something that might be technically off in the medical standards. But essentially, I have 3 goals here with our talk today. And so I guess a little bit of background of what I've been doing this last year is let me see. Oh, Yeah, it still says that you're sharing your screen, Dr. Lopez. Is that right? Or am I?
No, that's right, Javier. You need to stop your share. And actually, Priscilla, you're sharing. You need to not be sharing.
Okay.
Or maybe I can try and overwrite them. Yeah, so I'll just talk for a second. So essentially, what was
My apologies. Let me work on fixing this. Sorry, I was getting paged from the clinic and I needed to answer that. But,
no problem. So
It's Priscilla.
essentially-
Hang on. Okay. Let's see.
On the bottom, on the center, it's on my computer, it's green button that says share screen. You need to turn that off, please.
Okay, just a moment. I'm looking. My screen, my computer's gone goofy on me. Stop share. Okay, I got you. How's that?
Right.
Mute?
Great.
Okay.
Well, let me just try and override everyone. Okay, there we go. Looks like it's
okay.
Yeah, so a lot of my passion here kind of came from this idea that, you know, I was working in the lab and coronavirus happened, the lockdown happened, and I really wanted to do something. And you know, with my experience with influenza, I had a lot of friends contacting me and asking me questions about, you know, what about this? What about that? How deadly is the virus? And a lot of these questions. And so I ended up spending, you know, an hour or two every night responding to the same email or something like that with, you know, all my different citations and, you know, me being a scientist and very detailed. So eventually it turned out that, you know, a lot of people really want to know this stuff. So I decided to start a podcast. And so I've been doing a podcast for the last month and a half or so. I have 6 episodes up right now, and it's really heavily focused on the audience and, you know, answering these questions for the audience. And every now and then I kind of need to do an episode of research on my own, just, you know, to satisfy my own interests and curiosities. But the majority of the episodes are focused on essentially getting some facts straight and then having a conversation about it. So that's going to be the intention here, is that I want to kind of just, you know, clarify some facts. I'm going to go over a lot of the misunderstandings that happen in my audience. Now, my audience is a little bit different. You know, they're range from 30 to 50. Or, you know, 20s to 50s, but the majority of them are in their 30s. So, you know, some of these opinions and some of these questions might be different. So I'm very happy if you guys, you know, have any questions or something like that, you can just speak up and we'll go ahead and answer those for you as we go on. The other thing that I really want to kind of put across is how important public opinion is on science and how much of funding in the direction of science can be really guided by public opinion and by you guys. And so the secondary goal that I've always really had is to actually engage public and engage you guys in these conversations to help us answer these questions so that you can guide where our funding goes from, because most of scientific research is publicly funded. So the talk today is essentially clarifying a lot of the questions I've had about vaccines. Let me get this presentation going. So essentially I'm going to start off with, you know, this is kind of my general outline, which is, you know, these are the questions I get. Well, so the main questions I get is, you know, how does a vaccine work and how are these COVID vaccines different? Why are they different? So essentially, we kind of need to go over a few basic things, which is, how does your body fight an invasion or an infection, whether it's bacteria or a virus? Now, the easiest way to explain this is I'm just going to explain it by, you getting a cut and, bacteria or something getting into the cut. But it's essentially a similar mechanism to a virus. And then how does a traditional vaccine work? Well, we've been, doing vaccines since the, start of the smallpox. And luckily in the last, 50 years, we've actually gotten rid of all smallpox. So people no longer need to take smallpox. The other aim for the WHO is completely get rid of polio. So we haven't really had much of a problem. I think the last case in the US was 1993 from polio, and that was someone traveling to the US. But, and recently the WHO has eliminated polio from the continent of Africa, and polio is now only in 3 countries. But if we kind of let up on that, then polio can respread across the world. And so, but vaccines has been the essential tool for that. So, I'm going to kind of be going over those types of vaccines that we've been having for the last, few years. And then I need to go over a few important terms just because, and a few concepts just to understand how these new vaccines are working. And then I'm going to kind of go into a little bit about, what's in the vaccines and stuff like that, which is what everyone's kind of concerned about. So the reason I'm kind of doing these last few points is really to get to why we're, why we need additives to certain vaccines. And a lot of these additives that people are concerned about aren't actually in the vaccines that they're going to be getting. So there's also a lot of misunderstanding as far as which vaccine you're going to get. And at the very end, I'm going to give you guys some scenarios and questions, more of ethical questions, more of like things that don't really have a great answer. And I'm going to kind of give you guys facts as we have these conversations and see how that changes your answers. Okay, so essentially, I'm sorry, I was putting this presentation together. I'm not really fancy on PowerPoint. I hope everyone kind of forgives me, but essentially these is the general mechanism is when you get a cut and a bacteria gets into that cut or some sort of foreign, we say foreign agent or, foreign infection is that you have this mechanism that comes to that cut site and it just gets rid of everything. And so these are kind of cytokines. If it sees something new, it'll make an antibody against that. And the reason is and these antibodies are stored in what's called memory cells because they remember what you've been infected with. And then the next step here is that let's say that same infection comes, but now it's an older infection. Well, now we can use these antibodies to essentially target. So the main difference is when you have a new infection, you have essentially eradication of everything, of cells, of your own cells, and even the new bacteria or the new virus or whatever you're targeting. And then, so the more targeted thing is these antibodies. So the way that I kind of talk about this is, the cytokines is kind of the nuclear bomb just to get rid of everything. Whereas the antibodies are something very, very targeted. And those are kind of your smart targets, smart missiles. Let's see, what do I have here? Okay, so now let's talk about how this works with the vaccine. So traditionally what would happen is that we're going to give you some sort of pathogen. Pathogen is just a fancy word for, something that will infect you like a bacteria or virus. But what we do before we give it to you is we inactivate it or we severely weaken it. And the term you'll hear is attenuated when you talk about a weakened virus. Now, some of these methods is, we can use UV light. We can grow them in we grow them with using cells that are not from like the humans. Like the biggest one is eggs. So a lot of the times when you hear about allergic reactions or something like that, it might be due to the eggs and that the vaccines were grown in. But by allowing the vaccine or the weakened virus to essentially grow in something besides human cells, what we really get is a virus that can't really do a good job at infecting our cells. And so what that happens is at that initial injection site, you'll have kind of these cytokines come in and they'll get rid of it. They'll create memory cells. Now, when you actually get the virus that is really, really strong, now we have these antibodies that can target this virus. And so essentially the whole goal here is to generate the antibodies in a way to train your cells in your body to make antibodies without making you that sick. So that's kind of the general concept of all vaccines, whether traditional or the new ones. And we'll kind of get in the different ways that they're trying to train your body with these new vaccines. Excuse me. But before we do that, I do need to kind of go over some, before I get into the new vaccines and how the COVID vaccines work, I kind of need to go over a few different terms. And so, and you can just think about this as step 1, step 2, step 3. You don't really need to think about, all these different terms, but I'm gonna bring these up later. But essentially you have DNA, and then the DNA will make RNA. And then the RNA essentially is a way for your proteins to be made. And your proteins are kind of the machines and like the engines and the cars and everything that would run your cells. And then around all of that, to kind of keep everything in place and make sure that things aren't mixing and going away, you have an oil layer called a lipid. And so this is essentially your cell membrane. Is the other term for it. So the whole purpose for this is just to kind of keep everything in a little oil bag. So one of the things is that I just kind of put this as a side note. You don't really need to remember it, but viruses are kind of broken up into what type of these step 1 or step 2 molecules have, whether that is a DNA virus or an RNA virus. And we call that viral DNA and viral RNA, just because they do look very, very different from the human RNA and the human DNA. And if you guys have questions about that, I can go into that. Okay. So in order to also understand these vaccines, we kind of need to understand a little bit the basic level of how a virus works. And so essentially what a virus does is it goes and it finds your cell, it injects its viral RNA, which is kind of shown with this little green dot here. Now that green dot is what I did my PhD on. That's how focused my research was just on that one little green dot. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that little green dot. But essentially what happens is the RNA goes in, it goes into your nucleus, which is just kind of where everything is made. It's kind of like the brains of the cell. And it forces your cell, it essentially hijacks, it steals all of the machinery that's in your cell, and it forces your cells to make new virus. And the new virus will now have, and then the virus will be put out into, once there's enough of this virus created, the cell is essentially disintegrated. It breaks down your cell and then it releases all these viruses. back into the environment, and then this process is repeated over and over. The only real, the main reason I'm pointing this out is because we are using RNA vaccines, mRNA vaccines. So this is kind of an important thing to understand. But then there's also going to be, I'll kind of address a misunderstanding or kind of a theory that a lot of people have been asking me about, which is, does these new vaccines actually change your DNA or your genome in sense? There's been a lot of things about the vaccines changing some sort of genetics. And that isn't true at all, because the virus itself doesn't need to change your genetics at all in order to create new virus. And so this is completely free floating from your genetics. There's no alteration, even if a virus infects you, and the vaccine essentially works in a very, very simplified way. So, okay, so now I just want to quickly go over, well, how does an antibody actually work? Well, what this antibody does is it looks for things on the virus called proteins. And this particular protein is called the spike protein. And you'll hear that a lot in the media or in the news. And so this spike protein works as a fingerprint, or something that can positively identify whatever it is. So for this particular virus, it's called the spike protein. For other bacteria or something else, it can be anything, but it just needs to be on the outside, and it's kind of just something that allows you to recognize it. I kind of say it looks, imagine recognizing your friend by their face. You can determine, who's your friend and who's you're not by, their friend, by their faces. So that's what these antibodies are doing. Is they're essentially made to feel the face of the spike protein and kind of make a mold, a mold of the face, and then it takes that mold and it searches around the body until it finds another face, and then it binds to it, and it essentially makes it so this virus can't infect anything. So the whole point about vaccines, whether they're traditional or new, is to make the antibody against this spike protein. That's all we're doing. And so these new vaccines are essentially taking advantage of new technologies to be able to do this. Okay, so these are the three vaccines that we're looking at. And so I didn't include, there is one fourth one that you might hear about, but I'm not including it because it really hasn't made it past phase 2, and it doesn't seem like it might be that effective. And the companies that have been doing it have tried it a few times, and they really haven't succeeded. So I didn't include it because I don't think that you're ever going to see it. But the other one that I'm including is on the far right. Now, the main reason I'm including that is you're probably not going to see this one either, because this is the one, this is the one that might, was generated by China, and some of those institutions out there. And while it seems like it might be very good and all that, we just didn't really pursue that. So maybe I'll just cover that one first, which is that essentially what it does is well, actually, sorry, let me start from the left side and we'll go to the right, because maybe it'll make things more interesting. So, are more understandable. So the first one that we need to talk about is this attenuated, what's called attenuated or weakened adenovirus, which essentially is a DNA virus. And essentially we took this virus and we inserted a gene in there, and that gene only will express that spike protein. And again, the whole goal for making antibodies against this is to create this spike protein. Now, the important thing about this virus is that it comes from chimpanzees, which is, kind of the animal that it normally infects, but it's never been able to show that's ever been able to replicate or do any sort of damage to humans. And so instead of kind of making a health, so the difference between this and a traditional vaccine is that instead of making instead of taking, let's just say the traditional way would be taking the COVID virus or the SARS-2 virus, and we would weaken it. Well, now what we're taking is we're taking a completely different virus. We're putting in the important genes that we need to express essentially just that spike protein. But we don't have to go through this lengthy process of weakening this virus because we already know it doesn't replicate inside of human cells. So does anyone have any questions on that one?
Ryan, let me make a comment.
Sure.
So the adenovirus in this vaccine works as a Trojan horse. It's a carrier to carry the virus, the DNA of the COVID-19 virus that we need to get inside of our body. So it is really a carrier of the virus DNA that we want to make that we want to vaccinate people for. So the value of using it, like you're saying, is that this adenovirus from chimpanzees has never been shown to infect a human. So in that way, it's a safe carrier, or the Trojan horse is a safe Trojan horse to be given to people. And I think that I want to make sure there's a distinction between this adenovirus and the COVID virus. So the shuttle or the carrier is just biologically needed to be able to deliver the DNA from COVID virus into our body. And that's how the body then will be able to make the protein and lead to the vaccine or the antibodies for the vaccine.
Correct. And yeah, that's a great way to say it is, it works as a carrier, because the whole thing is, how do we mail this package to your cells? How do we kind of just get this in there? And so on the left side, though, I put these little balls on there just to kind of show that it is it does have proteins on it, which essentially means that, it is a virus. But again, as Dr. Lopez was saying, is that, it is a, it cannot replicate in human bodies. So this, and then let's go to the middle one. So now,
sorry, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So essentially, instead of weakening the COVID virus, like how it would be done in the traditional way, so with this is we're getting a whole different virus, right? Which is the adenovirus that is found in the chimpanzees.
Yes.
And we're putting a spike protein on there, the same spike protein that would be recognized in the actual coronavirus, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand this correctly.
Yeah.
So that is not the traditional way. This is the mRNA way of doing the vaccine, correct?
Yeah. And I have kind of the next slide comes from a review paper that, I've linked that people can kind of try and read through if they like. There's a lot of technical terms in there, but it is a review, so it's much simpler than a traditional like scientific paper. You might be able to pick up a few things, but
and then for the fact that it's found in the chimpanzee virus, and you're it's stating that there's no replication in humans, that's been studied, and there's studies for that.
Yeah, it's been extensively studied. So a lot of, and the main benefit of this as well is you don't go through this lengthy process of weakening an already COVID virus. So really the main benefit of this is we don't have, well, one is we're not introducing a virus that would be able to infect, humans. Although, traditionally these viruses, we've been doing a very, very good job in most of these vaccines, where they're not really shown to, have this virus kind of become reactive inside your cells. So we're kind of getting rid of that. But the other really great thing about this is that process of weakening a COVID virus takes a long time. So the fastest vaccine that went to mass production, the first production was this MMR vaccine, and that took about 4 years. Now, in order to get to the general public, though, that took about 10 years. So, we're doing this at essentially, hopefully we can get to the mass public by fall, which is, 18 months. So a lot of these vaccines, the biggest benefit is the cost of production and stuff like that.
Okay, and then I just have one more question.
Sure.
So in the beginning, when you stated we weakened the virus, and then we use what do we use to replicate the virus? You said we didn't use any human products or cells to grow the vaccine, correct?
So traditional vaccines, so this is kind of a misnomer. And I'll kind of use this, is we use something called cell lines. And cell lines have been around for years. And the most famous one is these HeLa cells. Maybe you've heard about it on like some sort of podcast or science things. I hear about this a lot, this story a lot. And essentially it's a little bit controversial because these cells were taken they were taken with consent, but they weren't replicated with consent. But essentially, they were taken from a 1956 patient, Henrietta, from cervical cancer. And because they were cancerous, they grew really fast. So we were able to put them on, plastic and give them food and all this other stuff and grow these cells. Now, these cell lines are still around today, and we use them all the time. So those cells are essentially still from the initial cells of Henrietta. So when you hear about animal products and stuff like that, we're not actually killing animals to make these vaccines or anything like that. We are using cell lines that might have been taken from an animal maybe, several years ago or a decade ago.
Okay, so for those cell lines, so they are ultimately coming from a human host, correct? Which is a human cell line, correct?
Not always. So the traditional vaccines, when we're weakening, when we're making these attenuated or something like that, we are using mostly the most common one is an egg cell line, or using egg whites or egg yolk. But there have been vaccines that have been, I think, done in dog and other stuff like that. So most traditionally, if we're making a vaccine or a virus that doesn't infect, if we're trying to weaken a virus, we're using a cell line that is not human, because we want to get that virus, accommodated to essentially infecting something that isn't human. And then once we're sure that it's optimized to infect, let's say, dog, then we will put that back into human, because we know now the virus is much happier with dog and it won't be able to replicate. Now, there is this controversial thing with this adenovirus, which is they are using human male fetus cells, but the cell line has been around for years.
Okay.
I'm gonna interject as an editorial with editorial power. Please. Here. We're going down the molecular biology of how to make certain things in the laboratory. I'd like to come out of there and come more towards how we are going to make these vaccines get to people, just in the other direction for the sake of time, because I think we want to have a little bit more discussion. I've got a couple of messages on the chat box. trying to create the distinction between the attenuated virus vaccine, which is on the left hand of your screen, which is the one that has been made by AstraZeneca, that's the company, which is not yet approved in the United States. And then the one in the middle, which is the vaccine that is made by Moderna and Pfizer. They're two companies that are made two separate vaccines. And Pfizer was the one that was approved last week, and Moderna is the one that was approved today, I think, or yesterday. So yesterday was a vote, but I think today is the final FDA approval of it, if I'm keeping my news correct. So I want us to spend a couple of minutes, maybe, Ryan, if we can kind of create the distinction of these two, and then maybe just kind of ignore the China vaccine on the right, and then we can answer questions about it if people have questions about that. But just try to create the difference of these two, because I think this is the ones that we're all going to be hearing in the news for the next month or two about. And I want to make sure that there are questions and understanding of the distinction between these two, and then go from there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so let's just focus on this mRNA vaccine, because there are a lot of questions. I had an hour and a half discussion about essentially animal products and how vaccines are being done on my podcast. I can send a link to you guys then, if you guys want to hear more information about that. But essentially, this mRNA vaccine actually kind of solves a lot of this problems, because this is all synthetic. And so in the great thing about this is it's very, very simple. So essentially is just viral RNA. And this viral RNA is not the entire virus. All it is the spike protein. So, this virus has 30 proteins. This is 1/3 of one of those proteins. So there's no way that's going to replicate or do anything like that. And then what we do is we do have to package it, when we're mailing it to a cell, in some sort of oil. Now, this oil can come from anywhere. It can come from petroleum, coconuts, whatever. There are specific oils that they do have to make in order to make the kind of the packages small enough, and some technical stuff like that. You might hear that the dosage of Moderna and Pfizer are different, or that temperatures are different and stuff like that. And that's probably coming only really from the way that the different oils that they use, and how these oils kind of make smaller and bigger packages in different conditions. But essentially this mRNA, this viral RNA, infects your cells. And then, or it doesn't infect it. The oil itself, it allows the mRNA to get into your cells, because your cells are covered in oil. So it allows the RNA to get past that oil barrier. And then the really, really important part here is this green molecule on the end of this. And so this is what makes it viral. And this green molecule is what makes this vaccine work. And also the great thing about this little green molecule is it also makes it so we don't have to have additives. So the main difference between, a lot of these traditional vaccines is we would have to include some sort of additives. Now, you might have heard of aluminum hydroxide, or some of these other additives that we needed to add. And essentially that was to, when you get some sort of injection, you need to also call your immune system to the site where you're injecting. And so that site itself needs some sort of like, hey, come check me out. And that's what this green little molecule does on this RNA, and that's why we need it. I do just briefly want to comment on the China one, which is essentially, instead of giving yourself any sort of RNA or DNA, it's essentially just delivering the protein itself that your cells need to use, or your immune system needs to use to make antibodies. But the main thing that you'll hear about this, and the reason I want to address this, is because I've seen a lot of people complaining about the use of squalene, which comes from shark livers. And essentially they have to add this additive, a squalene, in order to call the immune system to check out these proteins. So when you hear reports about squalene or something like that, it's not associated with this mRNA. It's only really associated with a Chinese and an Australian vaccine, both of which you're not going to see. Oh no. Let me see here. Sorry. Okay. I'm really sorry. For some reason, this image is not showing up on my screen. But maybe it was just essentially recapping everything I saw or everything I kind of talked about. The main advantages of a lot of these vaccines I've talked about, and a lot of these new vaccines, is again production speed. And you know, not to scare anyone, but these technologies have been around for quite a while. We have been able to do this, but when you're talking about medicine, you know, you need to talk about risk and reward and stuff like that. And when you're making new treatments, sometimes there is that risk. And there wasn't really that much of a reward because our traditional vaccines were working so well. But now there is a huge reward because now we can mass produce these new vaccines on a whole nother level. And again, they are seeming pretty safe right now. So I do kind of just want to bring up a few different additives, or what's called adjuvants. And so again, this is aluminum hydroxide. Now, I wasn't, while doing the research for my podcast, I did find a table that I wasn't able to identify last night when I was making this presentation, but essentially aluminum hydroxide is not in the mRNA vaccine or the adenovirus vaccine, or the Oxford. So those three vaccines shouldn't have any additives that might be controversial. Again, the antigen or the China vaccine or other countries that might do the that style of vaccine might need to add squalene or some other chemical to call your immune system. I did kind of put in this thing about thiomersal, but if you guys have questions, we can address it. But essentially, thiomersal is not in your vaccines anymore. It really has been phased out of the US. Now, it still is needed in third world countries and stuff like that. And we can go into the reasons of that if you guys are interested, but that's something that, again, you guys won't be able to, you guys aren't going to need to worry about that. Okay, so let me see. I'm just checking. So what time are we ending here today?
When you finish talking, you're interesting.
Okay. Well,
we would probably want to wrap it up by 1 o'clock, and we would want to give at least 15 minutes where we have conversation, where we're answering questions.
Okay. Well, this is actually the conversation part.
Oh, perfect.
So this is kind of where I'm gonna ask your guys' opinion. So essentially, you know, the biggest question here right now is that vaccines are very, very limited. And I think everyone can agree that, you know, we're going to get, you know, the frontline workers and people in elderly housing and people that really need the vaccines. Those are who we're going to offer it to first. But, you know, let's not kid ourselves here that the majority of the people aren't going to see it until, you know, possibly late summer. And that's just in the US. So, you know, the first group is really well taken care of. So there's been a few different plans in place, but let's just say that, you know, frontline workers, essential workers, and elderly are all vaccinated. Well, who should be on that third tier, which is the general public? you know, some of the proposals, some of the plans proposed is to optimize years saved, which means that, you know, essentially we're just going to figure out, you know, if I give this vaccine to someone, how well can, you know, how many years can I save with it? What do you guys think about that plan?
I'm gonna make the first comment. I think that the plans of who to give vaccines is still in the making. The only decision I'm aware that is finalized is the idea that we're going to give it to first responders and medical personnel first. But I think this is a point that is still being discussed in a way of who should have priority for vaccines. So.
Yeah, so let me just also, I guess, say the reason I'm doing all this is because public opinion is really going to help essentially finalize a lot of these plans, and really it's a public that's going to be, I think, deciding this third level of people, and so I'm really kind of asking more of these, you know, ethical and kind of these are the kind of conversations that scientists are having. And because public opinion is going to affect this, I want you guys to also have these conversations. So this is exactly the conversation that I'm having with, you know, people that work with the WHO and stuff like that.
So Ryan, the second level, then when you say elderly, in some ways, all of us would fall in that category. But I think what you may have meant is those that are in skilled nursing facilities and so forth. And then when you, and my second clarification that I wanted was when you, the phrase optimize years saved, is that a nice way of saying that how many years the individual has left longevity wise that you would be protecting by vaccinating? In other words, the younger people might be, or am I misinterpreting what optimized years saved means?
Well, that's kind of the question we're trying to answer is what do they mean, and what are the possible, I guess, consequences of optimizing years saved. And so let me just clarify the first thing. So I'm really focusing on the third wave, the third tier here, because the second tier is going to be essential workers and, you know, anyone I think over 65 is kind of what we're thinking about.
Whether they're in a facility or not, you're saying the second tier.
The second tier, yeah.
Are people over the age of 65 will automatically be the second tier, or that's the trend of the discussion?
That's a trend of the discussion. So, you know, one of the things I really like to do is I like to kind of use some of these phrases that people use in the news or in the science, and then really try and figure out what the consequences of this are. So, you know, you brought up a really good point. Like, if we're optimizing years saved, does that mean now we're switching to very young people? And one of these consequences that has been kind of criticized about this optimized years saved plan is that the burden is actually going to be on disabled and people in poverty, people in poor health. So for example, if you take two 20-year-olds, two female 20-year-olds that are identical, you know, economic and stuff like that, but one has MS and one is healthy. Well, with optimized years saved, you're going to give the vaccine to the healthy one because the person with multiple scoliosis isn't expected to live as long.
Wouldn't this create a problem in making, and who's going to be making these decisions? That's like saying the wealthy should be able to be vaccinated first, or the powerful. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but somehow if someone has MS versus one healthy, should the judgment be made that the healthy one be vaccinated? Somehow this
add into that, because concerned me when you put that up, and Karen skirted the edge of my concern. My concern is it's going to be based on race. If you look at the history of healthcare in this country in particular, and I'm only talking about this country, if you're talking about health expectations, they are different based on the race of the person, not only the socioeconomic position, not only where they live, but the race. And the care has been different. So I'm concerned about that. I would.
Well, that would be part of,
right.
I mean, of this kind of who's making the judgment and how's it being made. I mean, race would certainly be in that equation.
Yeah, and you know, this is the reason that I'm bringing this up now to you guys, because I want the public to make these decisions and not, you know, people just running numbers.
Otherwise, it gets very political, and there's something in some of the history that we all know that, you know, is kind of leaking into some of that discussion when you say a healthy, or whether one's Black, or, you know, any of these kind of issues. Yeah,
exactly. And you know, we'll kind of go into this question of wealthy, you know, when we get into the great, because right now I'm just focusing on the US. The next questions get involved, you know, how the different countries are going to be, you know, vaccinated and stuff like that. So yeah, I just kind of want to open this kind of concern, or can you guys propose a way that maybe we can vaccinate people in a more ethical way?
Well, I'd like to say that I think it's based upon need. I'm 72 years old and I'm in good shape and I'm not going anywhere, but I've got a daughter that's in early stages of pregnancy, and her husband drives a delivery van, and he's in his late 30s. I would give my place in line to him. I think it's more important than he gets the vaccination than for myself. And that's just my comment on that. It has to be based upon, I think, who's at the highest risk.
Yeah, so that's also a great point. You know, we can take the example of actually how smallpox was eradicated with limited supplies. Now, smallpox was very visible. You can know when someone was infected, and they had very limited supplies. So what they would do is they would have a radio, and they would radio into different villages, and they would figure out how many people were infected. And then essentially would do is, you know, have someone run to the main hub of where all the vaccines were, take it back to the village, and vaccinate anyone that was around the infected. And so by vaccinating a very limited supply of the population, they were able to essentially, you know, eradicate smallpox from Africa with very limited supply. So that's a great comment. That's a great way to approach it.
Well, I'm going to make a comment that should be of concern to all of us. And this is the problem why coronavirus has been such a difficult virus to work with, is because contrary to smallpox, where it was very visible when you had the infection, and it was fairly short incubation period where you're infected with virus. Coronavirus, we have a large population, 80% of people that don't have symptoms, and it has a time of incubation before you get symptoms where you are infectious. And so that means the virus can spread very easily from person to person without really knowing who actually is spreading it, to person to person. And so that's what we know about this virus. This is why this virus has gone wild, if you will, in the world, spreading the way it has in such a short amount of time, because people are moving around and not restricting their movement enough to stop it from traveling. Now, here's the thing, and this is where I think this is going to be interesting and challenging coming up with the vaccine. We don't know yet that when you get a vaccine and you respond to the vaccine, when you get exposed to the virus, you don't get sick. That's what the vaccine does. It keeps you from getting sick. But we don't know yet whether that having the vaccine keeps you from spreading the virus. And that I think I've heard that they are measuring this in the AstraZeneca vaccine. I have not heard that they measured this. So this is how much virus do you still have on your nose and in your saliva, even though after you had the vaccine. You didn't get sick. You may still get the virus in your nose and saliva, go and visit your family members, and then still carry the virus to them. So if you're paying attention to the news, no one is saying that we're stopping the mask. And that, I think, is the reason we're not going to stop masking for a long time, even though we have vaccine available. Because we may not be getting sick, the individual who gets the vaccine, but the person visiting that hasn't got the vaccine yet may still potentially get sick. We don't know that for sure yet, but it is a concern. So I think any schema we come up with to vaccinate, it's not going to be ultimately effective at a population level until we vaccinate everyone in the population, because of these asymptomatic people that can carry virus from place to place, and potentially even independently of a vaccine. So coronavirus may be here for a long time. Because of that fact. And so I don't think we're going to have an effective way of curtailing this until we actually vaccinate everyone.
Isn't it also true that, or at least I've seen on the many reports on television, that they don't know yet, there's no data on immunity, how long that will last after being vaccinated with either the first or the second? Well,
so the issue is this is kind of one of these things where, you know, you say, well, scientists aren't really sure how long this is, and people kind of assume that we don't know anything about anything, you know. And so I've heard a lot of people tell me that we don't know anything about coronavirus. Well, in fact, we learned more about coronavirus in the last year than we did about HIV in the decade after, you know, HIV. So we know a lot, we just don't know everything. And so as far as what you're talking about is that we do have data on, you know, clinical trials and stuff like that, but we don't know, you know, the debate isn't whether it lasts for a week or not. The debate is, you know, does it last for, 3 months? Does it last for 6 months? You know, so it does seem to be, you know, that we are reaching, you know, we do have some sort of longevity. We're just not really sure of how long that longevity goes for. It could go for, you know, a year. So the one thing that does happen is your primary kind of antibodies disappear, but you still have those memory cells for quite a while, which allows you to scale up your antibodies really quickly. Now, on some of these comments too, with Dr. Lopez, you know, I just kind of want to make a statement that a lot of the things I've been hearing is about reinfection. And what seems to be happening based on the statistics is that, let's say someone gets the virus and they go to the hospital, and then, you know, 2 weeks later they test positive again. That is a big concern, because this, but what seems to be happening is it isn't reinfection. It might be more likely to be reactivation. And what that means is that you're infected, you get treated, the virus goes in hiding, and it hides between the spaces of your cells. And then eventually, sometime after, it seems to be about 2 weeks, the virus is expressed again. And so I could definitely see scenarios where, you know, someone has a mild case of coronavirus, they think that they're immune now, and they go out and do things and just hang out, but, you know, and they don't get symptoms, but they might get infected again and be asymptomatic, because it is pretty evident that people with asymptomatic or mild cases of corona don't have good antibodies. Those antibodies are usually much weaker than someone that's been hospitalized.
Yeah, I would second the idea of these memory cells are our hope that this is going to be, there will be some lasting immunity. We know from the first SARS infection from 16 years ago and the MERS infection in 2012, that people that have been followed over years now from those, and those were coronaviruses, not exactly the same coronavirus here, but just a cousin, if you will, of this coronavirus. And we know people that were infected from those other outbreaks, their antibodies will go down, but they still have memory T cells that would respond to activation from new virus. So we're hoping that our bodies, and it is still unknown since this thing has only been around for about 10 months that we've been studying it. It's unknown really the longevity of the immune response. And so that it is true. We still don't know for sure because we haven't had enough time to follow people. But from the experience of the prior infections, epidemics, these memory cells are there and they stick around. Now we're humans. We're different. You know, we have differences across humans. So there will be always some humans that won't have as robust of the memory cells likely. And they will likely have either reactivation, like Ryan was saying, or they may get reinfected again. But the belief right now is that the larger population of people will actually have memory cells that will protect you the next time you get exposed from that. We're hoping the vaccine does the same thing. And again, it is only time is going to tell us whether do we need to get a booster of the vaccine 1 year, 3 years down the road, or are we good enough for 3 to 5 years with this vaccine? All of those are great questions. We don't have real answers yet, scientific answers today, because it's such a new process.
Yeah. So we can kind of come back to that previous question, but just because of time, I kind of want to give this question to you guys as well, which is kind of the last question. Then we can just go freestyle of where we want to go. But so the idea is that now, okay, we're taking care of people in the U.S. Well, you know, we still need to worry about the rest of the world. And so, you know, COVID will not kind of respect geographical borders that we put on there. And one of these instances you can look at is the Black Plague and how it actually got to Russia. So the Black Plague started off in Asia, and because of differences and disagreements between Islam and Christianity, Russia had basically cut off all trade routes. But that virus, that bacteria in that infection had traveled with, you know, all the trade routes over to Europe, and it basically went in through the west side of Russia through Europe versus, you know, through Asia. So, you know, without taking care of our neighbors, it's going to be very, very difficult to prevent the virus from, you know, getting back into the U.S. So there is this, you know, benefit of being altruistic and helping out other countries. So, you know, to invest in vaccinating other countries is kind of one of my arguments. And in addition to that too, is that the longer this virus infects people, the higher the risk that this virus will can mutate. And this mutation might actually create a virus that our vaccine is no longer effective against. And one of these instances, we can look at the mink kind of thing you might have heard in the news in Denmark, where the virus went into minks and infected a bunch of minks, and then it came back into the human population, into the farmers. And that strain of the virus was no longer, was weakened towards antibodies. So the faster we get rid of this worldwide, the better off we're going to be at lowering the risk of new strains coming up. And, you know, essentially, you know, my study was in influenza. And so there are child strains that all stemmed from the 1918 flu, endemic. So how do you guys feel about, you know, okay, well, the US and other very wealthy countries were the ones that had the resources and had the technology to generate vaccines. should we be investing a lot into, helping out, maybe vaccinate a lot of the countries that didn't have that? The other kind of caveat of this is, let's just take Pfizer. Pfizer, tested this vaccine in 26 other countries. So there are willing volunteers in these countries. Should we also be helping out those countries? And should there be some sort of priority list for this?
Well, in addition to the virus, the vaccine that we have currently today, I want to step back and say I think it's really important to vaccinate all countries and figure out how to do that properly. But the vaccines we have today are not stable in third world countries because they require such hard or heavy freezing. And so I think we have to solve the problem of having a stable vaccine that could be stabilized for a country where there's not the refrigeration that we have here in the US.
Yeah, that's also a really, really big concern. But, we are hoping that eventually we can come out with those traditional inactivated viral vaccines. There are those on the horizon as well. But again, the production just takes a lot longer.
Right.
I would add to that's why having 50 vaccines in the pipeline is important, because some of them will cost a lot more, others will cost a lot less. Some will be more stable in weathers and high temperatures and in low temperatures in different ways. So I think that having 2 vaccines showing up in the United States it's just the beginning of a long journey to the goal of vaccinating everyone across the world. But I shared the comments of several of you already through the chat box and the conversation. I think we're going to have to aim for everyone out there to get to control this virus.
I think we really are global. We're not, I don't even think of borders like I did when I was younger. So I don't know how we could not do this and, help other nations.
Yeah. Well, there is this kind of conversation going around, which is, well, what responsibility does the U.S. actually play in this? Because, we're not the ones responsible to vaccinate everyone.
And I think maybe we are, along with other countries that can do it. But that's, my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, one of my arguments for that is that, well, we are, responsible because, a lot of our resources and even our testing was done in a lot of these, countries. And the fact that, the one thing that I have been getting rid of as well is this idea that, the vaccine was created by the U.S. Well, it was created with the effort of the globe, whether that was ideas from different scientists. And one of the things that I can tell you, working in kind of infectious diseases and stuff like that, I know a lot of people around the world that have come out of retirement to help with this. So, what this effort wasn't just done by U.S. scientists.
Would you comment on the vaccine being used in Britain? Is it one of the ones that we're considering here, or is it a different one?
So the one in Britain is the Oxford one right now. I think they also approved the Pfizer. Maybe Dr. Lopez can comment. But I think their main one, the one that they developed, was the Oxford or the adenovirus. So it is different than the Moderna. I don't think that they're receiving the Moderna currently.
Yeah, I think the AstraZeneca, it's messenger inside of the attenuated virus is messenger RNA that they are shuttling in, right?
The AstraZeneca is the DNA chimpanzee.
That's right. So it's DNA. What they're shuttling DNA, but the code is the spike protein DNA. That's what they're shuttling.
Yeah. So it's that Trojan horse you were referring to.
Yeah, I don't know the details of the Oxford. I actually have not followed the details of the Oxford vaccine. So I don't know exactly what figuration. I do know that it is a much less expensive vaccine. That's the one feature I know of it. But I do not know the details of what's in the vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the other thing that we can avoid too by helping out is that, you know, if we only vaccinate essentially the wealthy countries and stuff like that, this could lead to, you know, nationalistic vaccination kind of fears like, oh, these countries are sick, and kind of looking at specific, you know, other countries as lesser and stuff like that. So that is a big concern about, you know, not also vaccinating, because things are just going to roll downhill. And, you know, for those countries, and, you know, when times get tough in certain countries, that's when extremists kind of take the reins.
Also, I think by protecting those countries, wherever those countries are, we're really protecting ourselves, because it will come back to us.
Exactly.
Because one of the things all of us want to do is get back on a plane, right, and fly around the world. Well, everyone else wants to do that too. So it is really, we are truly connected. It's not, you know, boundaries are not what they used to be. We travel around the world, and that's how these viruses spread. So, yeah.
Well, I can kind of leave us with my little thing, which is if you guys have further questions, you can email me at, you know, ryanlwoltz@gmail.com, or you can use my podcast email, which is just Bourbon and Tea Podcast. The name is just kind of taken from me and my friend whenever we had conversations and these big ethical and philosophical stuff. We just pour our favorite drinks to have a conversation. Mine happens to be bourbon, and hers happen to be tea. You can find a lot of this kind of information as well. A lot of the things much more in depth conversations. I would say, you know, if you're really interested in the vaccination stuff, you know, look at episode 5 and 6, which goes into a lot more detail about the specifics of each vaccine, and kind of addressing some of these concerns. I will say that the first 3 episodes are a little bit weird, and not really kind of where the podcast was going, just because this is my first time ever doing a podcast, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know the format. I didn't know how to do things. And it was just me and a friend talking for a while until we stopped. So, you know, the last few episodes have been a lot more structured and a lot more informative, I believe. So there is an episode I did on the research of the WHO, which, if you guys are concerned about this, this kind of vaccinating of other countries, I would really look into that, because the WHO is working on budgets of, you know, $5.4 billion, and UC Davis Medical Center, I believe, was working on $4 billion. So they're working on barely over a budget, you know, a little bit more of a budget than a big hospital. But they've, you know, eradicated smallpox. They're hoping to eradicate polio by 2023. And they've already agreed to purchase 2 billion vaccines to be able to donate to other countries and kind of help do that. I also kind of want to promote this collaboration that I'm doing, which is the Global Health Impact. This is done by Dr. Nicole Hassan. And this is a great website to know whether your pharmaceuticals or a country or a specific drug is actually doing much on the global health scale. So, you know, are they donating doses to countries that can't afford it? You know, are they focusing on efforts to do malaria drugs or other drugs that are problems in third world countries that we don't have here in the US? And yeah. So, and then also remember, because, you know, it's funny that Dr. Javier already said this, but, you know, getting the virus or the vaccine doesn't mean that you're immune. It only means that you're resistant. So keep protecting yourself until everyone is safe.
Thank you, Ryan. I have two questions in the chat that I want to give a brief answer. And then I want to read something that just came on my phone in the last 5 minutes, but I think it's a public health concern that you all need to hear. So don't hang up yet, because I really want to read what I just got on my phone, and I want you all to hear it. But there is a question about if you have the virus, if you don't have symptoms, even if you don't have symptoms, can you still get other organ problems? And this kind of allude to this idea of the what's so-called long COVID situation. Some people who may have mild symptoms initially, but then continues to have symptoms over time. That is an area that I'll be talking about probably in February to you guys about. We're trying to look into that here at UC Davis. We don't know very much about that. So that's why I don't have a direct answer. We don't know whether it's virus in your body. We don't know whether it's inflammation in your body. There's really still very unknown situation. So that's why I don't have any direct answers. And then somebody asked how to get access to the podcast. We'll send an email with the link to the podcast and with Ryan's email if you want to continue the conversation with him as a follow-up. Now I want to read to you what I got. It's a crime alert. And as some of you may know in Davis, there are crime alerts from the UC Davis Police Department. And it's a phone scam. It's a phone scam that involves callers trying to dupe people into reserving the COVID vaccine early. So they're calling you on the phone telling you that you can reserve a vaccine, and they want your information, all your personal information, to make sure that you get a vaccine early. And so this is a reminder that you should not fall for this. We don't know yet exactly how the vaccine is going to get to the general population. The plans for that will come from the state, and your most trustworthy source of information should be your doctor's office. Contact your doctor's office or UC Davis hasn't given us yet the plan, but we expect that there will be some sort of contacting patients as the vaccine becomes available. And as they create tiers of, target, high risk, whatever comes out, they'll start waves of contacting patients to get the vaccine. And then at some point after that wave occurs, we expect that there'll be a mass access, which so far the conversations I heard is going to be through places like CVS and Rite Aid that already offers flu vaccines today. That they already do that. They've been doing it for years. That they're going to use that infrastructure to get it to the general public at that point, beyond the doctor's offices. So I would not take on anybody else beyond that. If you haven't heard it officially from the state of California or from your doctor's office recommendations, I would probably be worried that there's something of concern or a scam or something, and just don't give anyone personal information if they call you for some access to the vaccine. The police department at UC Davis is already warning us of that. Okay.
So real quick, if we have maybe 2 minutes, can I just ask your opinion on referring to the long haulers on myocarditis? So I follow a lot of football and stuff like that, and there was an Ohio State study that looked at 26 different athletes, average age of 19 and a half. 4 of which developed myocarditis, and 8 of which had scar tissue, all of which were either mild or asymptomatic. And then we also recently we've had several football and basketball athletes kind of dropping out of these programs because they're developing myocarditis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a very real scenario. It's a very real scenario. It's severe myocarditis is still in less than 5% of the people who are having symptomatic COVID infection. We haven't surveyed the population for everyone who does not have symptoms and whether they also having some. And we think that that there are some few people out there that are having no symptoms from COVID who may actually be having inflammation of the heart. Myocarditis means inflammation of the heart. And we don't know today. We just don't know today whether that is something we need to be worried about or not. There are recommendations for athletes, and athletes should be screened. If they have COVID, they should be screened before they go in competitive sports. Mm-hmm. And there were some initial recommendations, which I think are going to be amended or updated recently in the near future based on the cases that you've described, because there have been a few cases now. So they make it a little more stringent. It's like everything else with this infection. It's a very fluid situation. And I'll be reviewing some more of this in February with you guys, because we're working on putting together trying to make some sense of what's available out there. But it's very early to tell. So, with that, I'm going to thank you, Ryan, for your time and conversation, stimulating the discussion today. I want to thank all of you for attending and participating. And is there any other questions before we close the session?
May I just ask, it's maybe a personal question, but since the Moderna and Pfizer, as I understand, and I'm not a scientist, is based on a synthetic or genetic method, so without the live virus, if that's correct, then does there need to be a concern if one is, say that we're called up to get the vaccination, the COVID vaccination, if it's close to a flu shot or if it's in between the shingles shot, which many in this age group might be going through, should there be a consideration of, timing here?
Yeah, maybe Dr. Lopez can also give his opinion, but I think that there probably should be a consideration. I'm not really sure on the statistics of that. The one I would be concerned about or questioning about is the shingles, maybe not so much the flu shot or something like that, because the flu shot's very, very weak. It is a synthetic RNA vaccine. And we do have to, even though there's been 44,000 people vaccinated, in the trials vaccinated with Pfizer, a lot of those were very healthy people over 12 and without any sort of complications. So we still do need a little bit more information on a more diverse population. Maybe Dr. Lopez can also put in his 2 cents.
Yeah, I have not heard any recommendations about the interaction with the shingles vaccine. One of the reasons we wanted to vaccinate everyone for the flu early was so we have people done with the flu vaccine by the time we got with these vaccines. Not because we know there's an interaction, but because why to explore the interaction. So I think it's unknown. And it should be a discussion you have with your individual doctors.
Somehow I knew that you would say that, and of course, the individual doctor won't have a better answer because
they lack of knowledge.
Right, yeah. And the personal part is that I had one shingles shot the end of November, and the doctor said call back in 3 to 6 months for your second one, which might be the time, that I'm eligible. Who knows? We don't know, but it's a concern.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I will keep my ears peeled on the many activities and forums that I attend, and if I learn anything that may inform that, I will pass it forward.
Thank you very much. I think it's a question that could apply to many people.
Yeah. Well, so I will kind of just make a quick comment about the amount of questions I've been getting about, what if I, went through cancer treatment, or what if I recovered from lupus or something that really affected your immune system and lowered your immune system. And my answer to that is, well, we also don't really know, but one thing that might be possible for your primary care doctor is that they could be starting to run antibody tests and seeing how healthy your immune system is. And I would imagine that, if you are having a fully recovered immune system and stuff like that, then you potentially could be eligible. So that is one difference, that your primary care doctor might have a little bit more knowledge because they have more knowledge of your specific background.
And I guess the end of it, the risk factor of, you know, is COVID a bigger risk than it's chemicals?
When we get into these specific health questions, it is very, very dangerous to generalize.
Right.
So that's why it is very case dependent.
Well, thank you. This has been great. Thank you all so much.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
thank you very much.
You all have a happy holidays and a happy new year. I know it's not going to be the same, but there's no reason why we need to let that spoil all of our care for each other and attention of each other. So try to have the best, safest way you know how, but still share with each other and continue to try to have the best we can of these holidays. And it'll be better next year. I'm pretty sure about that. So just hang in there. Okay.
Thank you both for
Thank you.
fascinating hour and a half.
Thank you for your time.
Riveted to the screen.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.